kingdom worth billions, an army that nobody dared to challenge, a king so wise that rulers from across the known world traveled months just to hear him speak, and he threw it all away for women. But that's not even the wildest part, because after Solomon destroyed everything his father David built, the kingdom split in two, and what followed was one of the most brutal, bloody and bizarre sequences of events in the entire Bible. We're talking assassinations, coups, mass idol worship, a queen so evil her name became synonymous with wickedness, and a lone prophet who called down fire from heaven and then immediately wanted to die. This is the book of 1 Kings. And trust me, you've never seen it told like this. We're going chapter by chapter, verse by verse, and by the end, you'll understand why this single book contains some of the most important lessons ever written about power, faith, and what happens when people who should know better choose to ignore everything God told them. We're talking about a period of roughly 120 years, from the death of King David around 970 BC to the death of King Ahab around 853 BC. And in those 120 years, you'll see an empire built, a temple constructed that was one of the ancient world's greatest wonders, a nation split in two by a single conversation, and a prophet who stood alone against an entire corrupt government and called down fire from the sky. If you've ever thought the Bible was boring, you've never actually read 1 Kings. Let's get into it. To understand 1 Kings, you need to understand where we're starting. King David, the giant slayer, the man after God's own heart, the greatest warrior king Israel ever had, is old. And not just old. He's so frail that his servants can't even keep him warm. They pile blankets on him, they stoke the fires, and the man is still shivering. So his servants come up with a plan. They find a young woman named Abishag, a Shunammite girl, and they bring her to serve the king and lie beside him to keep him warm. The text makes it very clear that David had no intimate relations with her. He was past that. The mighty king who once danced before the Lord with all his might could barely lift himself out of bed. And this is important, because while David is lying there fading, something dangerous is happening outside the palace walls. David's son Adonijah looked at his dying father and saw an opportunity. Now, Adonijah wasn't just any prince. He was David's fourth son, and by this point, his older brothers were out of the picture. Amnon, the firstborn, had been murdered by Absalom for assaulting their sister Tamar. Absalom himself had died in his own failed rebellion against David, caught by his hair in a tree and killed by Joab. The third son, Chileab, is never mentioned after his birth, likely meaning he died young. So Adonijah looked around and figured he was next in line. The text tells us he was very handsome and that David had never corrected him or asked him, "Why do you behave as you do?" That line is devastating. It tells you everything about what's coming. David, for all his greatness as a warrior and a worshipper, had a blind spot when it came to his sons. He indulged them. He let them run wild. And now, with his father on his deathbed, Adonijah was about to take advantage of a lifetime of zero accountability. Because Adonijah decided he was going to be king, he didn't ask, he didn't wait, he just announced it. He got himself chariots and horsemen and 50 men to run ahead of him. He recruited Joab, David's military commander, and Abiathar, one of the priests, two of the most powerful men in Israel, now backing his claim. But here's the thing. Adonijah deliberately didn't invite certain people to his coronation feast. He left out Nathan the prophet. He left out Benaiah, the commander of the royal guard. He left out Zadok the priest. And most importantly, he left out his brother Solomon. That wasn't an accident. That was a calculated move. He knew exactly who would oppose him, and he tried to make his power grab a done deal before they could react. But Adonijah made one critical mistake. He underestimated a mother's determination and a prophet's cunning. Nathan the prophet went straight to Bathsheba, Solomon's mother, and what he told her was urgent. "Have you not heard that Adonijah has become king, and our Lord David doesn't know about it?" Then he laid out the plan. "Go to King David and remind him of his promise. He swore to you that Solomon would reign after him. While you're still speaking, I'll come in and confirm your words." Think about this for a second. This is political maneuvering at the highest level. Nathan didn't just rush to the king. He orchestrated a two-person play designed to cut through the fog of a dying man's mind and remind him of what he promised. Bathsheba went in first. She told David everything. Adonijah is king. He's got Joab. He's got Abiathar. He's throwing a feast right now, and all of Israel is watching to see what you'll do. Then, right on cue, Nathan walks in. Same story, same urgency. "Did you declare Adonijah king, my lord? Because that's what's happening right now." David's response was immediate. Whatever was left of the warrior king inside that frail body roared to life one final time. He called Bathsheba back in and made an oath. "As surely as the Lord lives, who has delivered me out of every trouble, I will surely carry out this very day what I swore to you by the Lord, the God of Israel. Solomon your son shall be king after me. Not tomorrow, not when things settle down. Today." David gave the order. "Put Solomon on my own mule. Take him down to Gihon. Have Zadok the priest and Nathan the prophet anoint him king over Israel. Blow the trumpet and shout, 'Long live King Solomon.' Then bring him back and seat him on my throne." And they did exactly that. Solomon rode David's own mule through the streets. Zadok took the horn of oil from the sacred tent and anointed Solomon. They blew the trumpet, and the people erupted. The text says the people played pipes and rejoiced with great joy, so that the ground shook with the sound. Meanwhile, Adonijah was still at his feast, still celebrating, still thinking he'd won. And then they heard it, the noise, the shouting, the trumpets. Joab, the old warrior, heard the sound of the trumpet and said, "What's the meaning of all this noise in the city?" While he was still speaking, Jonathan, son of Abiathar the priest, arrived. Adonijah said, "Come in. A worthy man like you must be bringing good news." Jonathan's answer destroyed everything. "No, our Lord King David has made Solomon king." The party was over. Every single one of Adonijah's guests got up and left. The text says they trembled with fear and scattered. One moment they were celebrating the new king, the next they were running for their lives. And Adonijah, he was so terrified that he ran to the altar of God and grabbed hold of its horns. In ancient Israel, this was the last resort. If you could cling to the altar, you were claiming sanctuary. You were begging for mercy. Solomon's response was measured. He didn't have Adonijah killed on the spot. He said, "If he shows himself to be worthy, not a hair of his head will fall to the ground, but if evil is found in him, he will die." Then he sent word for Adonijah to go home. Mercy, for now. But this story isn't over, not even close. Before David died, he called Solomon to him, and the charge he gave his son is one of the most honest, complicated speeches in the Bible. First, the righteous part. Be strong, act like a man, and observe what the Lord your God requires. Walk in obedience to him. Keep his decrees, his commands, his laws, and his statutes, as written in the law of Moses. Do this so that you may prosper in all you do and wherever you go. Beautiful, inspiring, exactly what you'd expect from the man after God's own heart. But then David kept talking. He told Solomon about Joab, how Joab had killed 2 army commanders in peacetime, Abner and Amasa, shedding their blood as though in battle. David said, "Deal with him according to your wisdom, but do not let his grey head go down to the grave in peace." He told Solomon about Shimei, the man who had cursed David when he was fleeing from Absalom. David had sworn not to kill Shimei himself, but he told Solomon, "You are a wise man. You will know what to do with him. Bring his grey head down to the grave in blood." And then he reminded Solomon to show kindness to the sons of Barzillai of Gilead. "Let them be among those who eat at your table. They stood by me when I was fleeing from your brother Absalom." Even in his final moments, David remembered loyalty. He rewarded faithfulness and settled debts, both the kind and the brutal. Then David died. The text says he rested with his ancestors and was buried in the city of David. He had reigned over Israel 40 years, 7 in Hebron, 33 in Jerusalem. And just like that, Solomon was alone on the throne. What happened next was ruthless, efficient, and necessary. At least, that's what Solomon would have argued. Adonijah went to Bathsheba with a request. He wanted Abishag, the young woman who had served David in his final days. Sounds innocent enough, right? Bathsheba even agreed to bring the request to Solomon, but Solomon saw right through it. In the ancient Near East, taking a king's concubine was a political claim to the throne. Adonijah wasn't asking for a wife. He was making a play for power. It was the same kind of move Absalom had made when he publicly took David's concubines during his rebellion. Everyone in the ancient world understood what it meant. Solomon's reaction was explosive. "Why do you request Abishag the Shunammite for Adonijah? You might as well request the kingdom for him." He swore an oath that very day, and before the sun set, Benaiah carried out the execution. Adonijah was dead. Then came Abiathar the priest, who had backed Adonijah's coup. Solomon didn't kill him. He said, "Go back to your fields. You deserve to die, but I will not put you to death now, because you carried the ark of the sovereign Lord before my father David and shared all my father's hardships." He stripped Abiathar of his priesthood and banished him, and the text notes that this fulfilled the word the Lord had spoken at Shiloh about the house of Eli. Even in Solomon's political decisions, ancient prophecies were finding their completion. Then came Joab, and Joab knew what was coming. He ran to the tent of the Lord and grabbed the horns of the altar, just like Adonijah had done. But this time, Solomon didn't show mercy. The blood of Abner and Amasa was on Joab's head. Benaiah went in and struck him down. Solomon then appointed Benaiah as commander of the army in Joab's place, and Zadok the priest in place of Abiathar, a complete restructuring of power. Finally, Shimei. Solomon gave him one rule: stay in Jerusalem, don't leave. The day you cross the Kidron Valley, you will die. Shimei agreed. He even said, "What you say is good. Your servant will do as my lord the king has said." For 3 years he kept his word, but then 2 of his servants ran away to Gath, and Shimei went after them. He couldn't help himself. The restriction felt small, the temptation felt reasonable, and the promise he made seemed distant. Sound familiar? When Solomon found out, he summoned Shimei. "Did I not make you swear by the Lord and warn you? You know in your heart all the wrong you did to my father David. Now the Lord will repay you for your wrongdoing." Benaiah carried out the sentence. The text ends this section with a single line that summarizes everything. The kingdom was now established in Solomon's hands. 4 deaths, 1 banishment, 0 loose ends. Solomon wasn't playing around. Now here's where the story takes a turn that most people don't see coming. Because after all that political bloodshed, after consolidating power through execution and exile, Solomon did something extraordinary. He went to Gibeon to offer sacrifices. This was the most important high place in Israel at the time. Before the temple existed, Solomon offered 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar, and that night God appeared to him in a dream. Think about the weight of that. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God who parted the Red Sea and spoke from a burning bush, appeared to this young king and said 5 words that would define everything. Ask for whatever you want me to give you. Whatever you want. Unlimited power, unlimited wealth, the destruction of every enemy, eternal life. Solomon could have asked for anything, but listen to what he said. You have shown great kindness to your servant, my father David, because he was faithful to you and righteous and upright in heart. You have continued this great kindness to him and have given him a son to sit on his throne this very day. He started with gratitude, not with a request, with thanksgiving. Then he said, Now, Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David, but I am only a little child and do not know how to carry out my duties. Your servant is here among the people you have chosen, a great people, too numerous to count or number. So give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong. For who is able to govern this great people of yours? A discerning heart. That's what he asked for. Not money, not power, not a long life, not victory in battle. Wisdom. And God's response tells you everything about what pleases him. Since you have asked for this and not for long life or wealth for yourself, nor have asked for the death of your enemies, but for discernment in administering justice, I will do what you have asked. I will give you a wise and discerning heart, so that there will never have been anyone like you, nor will there ever be. But God wasn't done. Moreover, I will give you what you have not asked for, both wealth and honor, so that in your lifetime you will have no equal among kings. And if you walk in obedience to me and keep my decrees and commands as David your father did, I will give you a long life. When Solomon woke up, he realized it had been a dream. But this was no ordinary dream. This was a covenant, a promise, and a warning. If you walk in obedience, remember those words. They're going to matter later. Solomon returned to Jerusalem, stood before the ark of the Lord's covenant, and sacrificed burnt offerings and fellowship offerings. Then he gave a feast for all his court, and God immediately tested his gift. The very first test of Solomon's wisdom became one of the most famous stories in human history, and for good reason, because it revealed that Solomon's wisdom wasn't just academic. It was the kind of deep, intuitive understanding of human nature that could cut through any deception. 2 prostitutes came before the king. Now already, this tells you something about Solomon's court. These weren't noble women. These weren't the wives of officials. They were prostitutes, the lowest rung of Israelite society, and they had access to the king. Solomon's justice wasn't just for the powerful. They lived in the same house. Both had given birth within 3 days of each other. One night, one of the women rolled over on her baby and the child died. She then switched the dead baby with the living one while the other mother slept. When the second mother woke up in the morning to nurse her baby, she saw that it was dead. But when she looked closely at the child in the morning light, she realized it wasn't hers. The other woman insisted the living baby was hers. They argued back and forth before the king. The living one is my son. The dead one is yours. No, the dead one is yours and the living one is mine. No witnesses, no evidence, no DNA tests, no security cameras. Just 2 women, 1 living baby, and 2 completely contradictory stories. Everyone in the court must have thought, there's no way to solve this. This was an impossible case. Solomon said, "Bring me a sword." They brought a sword. Cut the living child in 2 and give half to one and half to the other. The room must have gone dead silent. Then the real mother, filled with compassion for her son, cried out, "Please, my lord, give her the living baby. Don't kill him." But the other woman said, "Neither I nor you shall have him. Cut him in 2. Solomon said, Give the living baby to the first woman. Do not kill him. She is his mother. When all Israel heard the verdict, the text says they held the king in awe, because they saw that he had wisdom from God to administer justice. That story spread across the ancient world. Kings, merchants, and travelers carried it with them. Solomon's reputation was just getting started. But this wasn't just one clever judgment. Solomon's wisdom touched every aspect of life. The text tells us God gave Solomon wisdom and very great insight, and a breadth of understanding as measureless as the sand on the seashore. His wisdom was greater than the wisdom of all the people of the East, and greater than all the wisdom of Egypt. He was wiser than anyone else, wiser than Ethan the Ezrahite, wiser than Heman, Calcol, and Darda, the sons of Mahol. These were famous wise men of the ancient world, and Solomon surpassed them all. He spoke 3,000 proverbs. His songs numbered 1,005. He spoke about plant life, from the cedar of Lebanon to the hyssop that grows out of walls. He taught about animals, birds, reptiles, and fish. People from all nations came to listen to Solomon's wisdom, sent by all the kings of the world who had heard of his wisdom. He was essentially the ancient world's greatest polymath, a philosopher, poet, naturalist, judge, and administrator, all wrapped in one person, sitting on the throne of a growing empire. And nations noticed. What follows in 1 Kings chapter 4 is essentially a catalogue of prosperity so extreme it almost sounds made up. But the text lays it out in specific, verifiable detail. Solomon had 12 district governors supplying provisions for the royal household. Each one was responsible for 1 month of the year. The daily provisions for Solomon's court included 30 cors of the finest flour, 60 cors of meal, 10 head of stall-fed cattle, 20 pasture-fed cattle, 100 sheep and goats, plus deer, gazelles, roebucks, and choice fowl. For context, a cor was roughly 6 bushels. That's 180 bushels of fine flour and 360 bushels of meal, every single day. This wasn't just feeding a king. This was feeding an entire government apparatus, hundreds of officials, their staffs, their servants, and all the foreign dignitaries who were constantly arriving to hear Solomon speak. Solomon ruled over all the kingdoms from the Euphrates River to the land of the Philistines, all the way to the border of Egypt. They all brought tribute and were Solomon's subjects throughout his lifetime. The text says Judah and Israel were as numerous as the sand on the seashore. They ate, they drank, and they were happy. That last part is easy to skip over, but it matters. The people were happy. Under Solomon's rule, there was peace on all sides. Everyone lived under their own vine and fig tree, from Dan to Beersheba. That phrase, under their own vine and fig tree, became the biblical shorthand for security and contentment. It meant nobody was afraid. Nobody was looking over their shoulder for invading armies or tax collectors dragging them away. Life was good. Solomon had 4,000 stalls for chariot horses and 12,000 horses. His officials provided food for King Solomon and all who came to his table. Each one in his month, they let nothing be lacking. And what he was about to build would make all of it look small. Solomon had a vision. His father David had wanted to build a temple for God, but God told David he couldn't do it. Too much blood on his hands from too many wars. The temple would be built by his son, a man of peace. Solomon sent word to Hiram, king of Tyre. Hiram had been friends with David, and Solomon knew Tyre had the best cedar timber in the world. Lebanon's cedars were legendary. There was nothing like them anywhere. The deal they struck was massive. Hiram would supply all the cedar and juniper logs Solomon needed. In return, Solomon would give Hiram 20,000 cors of wheat and 20 cors of pressed olive oil every year. The text tells us the Lord gave Solomon wisdom, just as he had promised. There were peaceful relations between Hiram and Solomon, and the two of them made a treaty. Solomon conscripted 30,000 men from all Israel and sent them to Lebanon in shifts of 10,000 per month. They'd spend 1 month in Lebanon and 2 months at home. Adoniram was in charge of the forced labor. He also had 70,000 carriers and 80,000 stonecutters in the hills, plus 3,300 foremen who supervised the project and directed the workers. At the king's command, they removed large blocks of high-grade stone to provide a foundation of dressed stone for the temple. The craftsmen of Solomon and Hiram and workers from Byblos cut and prepared the timber and stone for the building of the temple. At the quarry, they prepared the stone before bringing it to the site. This is a detail that matters. The text says that no hammer, chisel, or any other iron tool was heard at the temple site while it was being built. Every stone was cut and shaped somewhere else, then brought in and placed silently. Think about the engineering that requires. Every block had to be perfectly measured and cut at the quarry so it would fit seamlessly at the construction site. No adjustments, no corrections. Perfect precision in silence. There's something deeply symbolic in that. The house of God was built without the sound of violence. No hammering, no chiseling, no clanging of iron against stone. In a world built by force and conquest, God's dwelling place was assembled in peace. And while the temple was being built, the word of the Lord came to Solomon. As for this temple you are building, if you follow my decrees, observe my laws and keep all my commands and obey them, I will fulfill through you the promise I gave to David your father, and I will live among the Israelites and will not abandon my people Israel. Even during construction, God was reminding Solomon of the condition: if you follow, if you observe, if you keep. The promise was real, but it was not unconditional. The temple was not large by modern standards, about 90 feet long, 30 feet wide, and 45 feet high. For comparison, that's roughly the footprint of a large house, but what it lacked in size, it made up for in staggering, almost incomprehensible beauty. The interior walls were lined with cedar, carved with gourds and open flowers. Not a single stone was visible from inside. The floor was made of juniper planks. The inner sanctuary, the most holy place, was a perfect cube, about 30 feet in every direction. And everything, the entire interior, the altar, the cherubim, the floors, the walls, all of it was overlaid with pure gold. Solomon had 2 cherubim made of olive wood for the inner sanctuary. Each one was 15 feet tall. Their wings were spread out, spanning the entire width of the room, wingtip to wingtip, wall to wall, and they were covered in gold. The doors to the inner sanctuary were made of olive wood, carved with cherubim, palm trees, and open flowers, and overlaid with gold. The doors to the main hall were made of juniper, also carved, also overlaid. Every surface told a story. Every detail pointed to something beyond itself. He commissioned a master craftsman from Tyre named Huram, whose mother was from the tribe of Naphtali and whose father was from Tyre. Huram was skilled in working with bronze, and the things he made were extraordinary. He cast 2 bronze pillars for the portico of the temple. Each one was 27 feet tall with a capital on top that was 7.5 feet high. The capitals were decorated with interwoven chains, pomegranates, and lily-shaped designs. Solomon named the pillars. The one on the south he called Jachin, meaning he establishes. The one on the north he called Boaz, meaning in him is strength. Huram also made the sea, a massive circular basin of cast bronze. It was 15 feet in diameter, 7.5 feet high, and 45 feet in circumference. It stood on the backs of 12 bronze bulls, 3 facing each direction, north, south, east, and west. The sea held about 11,000 gallons of water, and it was used for the priests to wash in. He made 10 bronze movable stands, each with bronze basins that held about 230 gallons. 5 stands were placed on the south side and 5 on the north, and of course the great bronze altar where sacrifices would be made. The amount of bronze was so great that Solomon left all these things unweighed. The text specifically notes this: there was so much bronze that nobody even tried to calculate the total weight. Then there were the gold furnishings, the golden altar for incense, the golden table for the bread of the presence, 10 golden lampstands, 5 on each side of the inner sanctuary, the gold floral work, lamps and tongs, the pure gold basins, wick trimmers, sprinkling bowls, dishes, and censers. Even the socket hinges for the doors were made of gold. When all the work King Solomon had done for the temple of the Lord was finished, he brought in the things his father David had dedicated, the silver, the gold, and the furnishings, and he placed them in the treasuries of the Lord's temple. It took 7 years to build. Let me say that again. 7 years. Tens of thousands of workers, cedar from Lebanon, stone cut with perfect precision, gold covering virtually every surface, bronze work that would have been considered masterpieces in any civilization. And the result was a structure so magnificent that it became the center of Israelite worship, identity, and national pride for centuries. But here's something interesting the text slips in almost as an afterthought. Solomon's own palace took 13 years to build, almost twice as long as God's house. The palace of the forest of Lebanon alone was 150 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. It had 4 rows of cedar columns with cedar beams on top. His throne hall, the hall of justice where he was to judge, was covered with cedar from floor to ceiling. The text doesn't comment on this directly, but it sits there, quietly asking a question about Solomon's priorities that becomes relevant later. When the temple was finished, Solomon assembled all the elders of Israel, all the heads of the tribes, and all the leaders of the Israelite families. They brought the Ark of the Covenant from the city of David and carried it into the inner sanctuary, the most holy place, and set it beneath the wings of the cherubim. Inside the Ark, there was nothing except the 2 stone tablets that Moses had placed in it at Horeb. The tablets of the covenant, the 10 commandments. That's worth pausing on. The most sacred object in Israelite religion, housed in the most beautiful building on earth, contained nothing but stone tablets with words on them. Not gold, not jewels, words. God's words. That tells you what God values most. When the priests withdrew from the holy place, the cloud filled the temple of the Lord. The text says the priests could not perform their service because of the cloud, for the glory of the Lord filled his temple. The glory of God, not a metaphor, not a feeling, a visible, tangible, overwhelming presence that literally stopped everyone in their tracks. The priests, trained professionals who had spent their entire lives preparing for this moment, could not stand to minister. The glory was too heavy, too real, too much. Solomon then said, "The Lord has said that he would dwell in a dark cloud. I have indeed built a magnificent temple for you, a place for you to dwell forever." Then he turned and blessed the whole assembly of Israel. He reminded them of God's promise to David, how God had chosen Jerusalem, how David had wanted to build the temple, but God reserved that honor for his son. Every word connected the present moment to the promises of the past. Solomon stood before the altar in front of the whole assembly and spread out his hands toward heaven, and then he prayed one of the most beautiful prayers in the entire Bible. "Lord, the God of Israel, there is no God like you in heaven above or on earth below. You keep your covenant of love with your servants who continue wholeheartedly in your way." He acknowledged that even the heavens cannot contain God, much less this temple he had built. "But will God really dwell on earth?" Solomon asked. The heavens, even the highest heaven, cannot contain you. How much less this temple I have built." Then he prayed for specific situations. If someone sins against their neighbor and comes to the temple to swear an oath, hear from heaven and judge. If your people are defeated by an enemy because they have sinned and they turn back and cry out to you, then hear from heaven and forgive. If the heavens are shut up and there is no rain because your people have sinned, hear their prayer and forgive. If there is famine or plague or blight or mildew, or if enemies besiege the land, whatever disaster or disease comes, hear every prayer and plea. If a foreigner who does not belong to your people comes from a distant land because of your name, hear from heaven and do whatever the foreigner asks, so that all the peoples of the earth may know your name. That last part is often overlooked. Solomon's vision for the temple wasn't just for Israel. It was meant to be a house of prayer for all nations. He was already thinking globally. He understood that the God of Israel wasn't just Israel's God. He was the God of everyone, and this temple was supposed to be a beacon that drew the whole world to him. He prayed for the soldiers going to battle. He prayed for the people taken into captivity. And then he said this: "When they sin against you, for there is no one who does not sin, and you become angry with them and give them over to their enemies, if they have a change of heart in the land where they are held captive, and repent and plead with you, then from heaven, your dwelling place, hear their prayer and their plea, and uphold their cause, and forgive your people. For there is no one who does not sin." Solomon knew, even as he stood there in the most magnificent building on earth, surrounded by gold and glory, he knew that people would fail, that Israel would fail, that he himself might fail. He just didn't know how badly. When Solomon finished praying, he stood and blessed the whole assembly of Israel in a loud voice. "Praise be to the Lord, who has given rest to his people Israel, just as he promised. Not one word has failed of all the good promises he gave through his servant Moses." Then he offered a sacrifice of fellowship offerings to the Lord, 22,000 cattle and 120,000 sheep and goats. The text says that on that day the king consecrated the middle part of the courtyard in front of the temple of the Lord, because the bronze altar was too small to hold all the offerings. The regular altar wasn't big enough. That's how massive the celebration was. Solomon and all Israel celebrated the festival for 14 days, 2 full weeks of sacrifice, feasting, worship, and celebration. On the following day he sent the people away. They blessed the king and then went home, joyful and glad in heart, for all the good things the Lord had done for his servant David and his people Israel. This was the peak of Israelite worship, the moment everything had been building toward since God called Abraham out of Ur. A people, a land, a temple, a king, and the presence of God dwelling among them. Everything was aligned, everything was right. But then God appeared to Solomon a second time. After the dedication, God appeared to Solomon just as he had at Gibeon. And he made a promise and delivered a warning that would echo through the rest of the book. The promise: "I have heard the prayer and plea you have made before me. I have consecrated this temple which you have built by putting my name there forever. My eyes and my heart will always be there." The warning: "But if you or your descendants turn away from me and do not observe the commands and decrees I have given you, and go off to serve other gods and worship them, then I will cut off Israel from the land I have given them, and will reject this temple I have consecrated for my name." God was specific, crystal clear, no ambiguity. "This temple will become a heap of rubble. All who pass by will be appalled and will scoff and say, 'Why has the Lord done such a thing to this land and to this temple?' People will answer, 'Because they have forsaken the Lord their God, who brought their ancestors out of Egypt, and have embraced other gods, worshipping and serving them. That is why the Lord brought all this disaster on them. Every word of that warning came true, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. Solomon's fame had spread so far that the Queen of Sheba heard about it from her kingdom, probably in modern-day Yemen or Ethiopia, over 1,000 miles away. And she didn't just send ambassadors. She came herself. She arrived in Jerusalem with a very great caravan, camels carrying spices, large quantities of gold, and precious stones. And she came to test Solomon with hard questions. The text doesn't tell us what those questions were, but the ancient world valued riddles and wisdom contests the way we value TED Talks. A ruler coming to test another ruler's wisdom was a diplomatic event with real political weight. The text says, Solomon answered all her questions. Nothing was too hard for the king to explain to her. When the Queen of Sheba saw all the wisdom of Solomon, the palace he had built, the food on his table, the seating of his officials, the attending servants in their robes, his cupbearers, and the burnt offerings he made at the temple, she was overwhelmed. She said to the king, "The report I heard in my own country about your achievements and your wisdom is true. But I did not believe these things until I came and saw with my own eyes. Indeed, not even half was told me. In wisdom and wealth you have far exceeded the report I heard." Not even half was told me. She had traveled over 1,000 miles because of the stories, and the reality was twice as impressive as anything she'd been told. Think about what that means. The rumors about Solomon's wisdom and wealth were so extraordinary that people thought they must be exaggerated. And then when you actually showed up, you realized the reality was even bigger than the rumors. She gave Solomon 120 talents of gold, large quantities of spices, and precious stones. That's roughly 4.5 tons of gold in a single gift. The text specifically notes that never again were so many spices brought in as those the Queen of Sheba gave to King Solomon. Solomon gave her everything she desired and asked for, besides what he had given her out of his royal bounty. Then she returned to her own country with her servants. This visit wasn't just diplomacy, it was a statement. The most powerful queen of the Arabian Peninsula made a pilgrimage to Jerusalem because the wisdom of Israel's God, channeled through Israel's king, was the most valuable thing in the known world. At this moment in history, the light of God was shining through Solomon so brightly that it was drawing the nations to itself, which makes what comes next even more devastating. Now the text starts listing numbers that are almost hard to process. The weight of gold Solomon received yearly was 666 talents. A talent was roughly 75 pounds. That's almost 50,000 pounds of gold every year. At today's prices, we're talking billions. And that didn't include the revenues from merchants and traders, from all the Arabian kings, and from the governors of the territories. He made 200 large shields of hammered gold. 600 shekels of gold went into each shield. He made 300 small shields of hammered gold. 3 minas of gold went into each shield. He put them in the palace of the forest of Lebanon. The king made a great throne of ivory and overlaid it with fine gold. The throne had 6 steps and a rounded back with armrests on either side. 12 lions stood on the 6 steps, one on either end of each step. Nothing like it had ever been made for any other kingdom. All of Solomon's goblets were gold. All the household articles in the palace of the forest of Lebanon were pure gold. Nothing was made of silver, because silver was considered of little value in Solomon's days. Read that again. Silver was considered of little value. We're talking about a precious metal that entire economies were built on, and in Solomon's Jerusalem, it was as common as rocks. The text says that Solomon made silver as common in Jerusalem as stones, and cedar as plentiful as sycamore fig trees in the foothills. You could walk down the street and kick silver aside like gravel. That's the level of wealth we're talking about. The king had a fleet of trading ships at sea, along with Hiram's fleet. Once every 3 years, the ships returned carrying gold, silver, ivory, apes, and baboons. These were goods from distant lands, probably as far as East Africa or even India. Solomon had essentially created an international trade network that stretched across the known world. He also accumulated chariots and horses. He had 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horses, which he kept in the chariot cities and also with him in Jerusalem. Solomon's horses were imported from Egypt and from Kuwait. The royal merchants purchased them from Kuwait at the current price. They imported a chariot from Egypt for 600 shekels of silver and a horse for 150. They also exported them to all the kings of the Hittites and of the Arameans. He had become not just a king, but an arms dealer, a trade magnate, a broker between nations. Egypt's chariot industry flowed through Solomon's merchants. The wealth wasn't just passive. It was actively generated through international commerce on a scale Israel had never seen and would never see again. King Solomon was greater in riches and wisdom than all the other kings of the earth. The whole world sought audience with Solomon to hear the wisdom God had put in his heart. Year after year, everyone who came brought a gift. Articles of silver and gold, robes, weapons, spices, horses and mules. This was the peak, the absolute zenith of Israel's power and prosperity. Everything God had promised, he delivered, and then some. But remember God's warning, if you turn away from me. And now we come to the most tragic chapter in the entire book, maybe one of the most tragic in the whole Bible, because the wisest man who ever lived did the dumbest thing imaginable. 1 Kings chapter 11 opens with a sentence that hits like a punch. King Solomon loved many foreign women. Not just any foreign women, Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Sidonian, and Hittite women. Women from the exact nations the Lord had told the Israelites, "You must not intermarry with them, because they will surely turn your hearts after their gods." How many women are we talking about? 700 wives of royal birth, and 300 concubines. 700 wives, 300 concubines. 1,000 women. The man whose wisdom was supposed to be unmatched couldn't see what was right in front of him. And here's what makes this so agonizing. It wasn't sudden. The text says, as Solomon grew old. This wasn't a young man's mistake. This was a slow, decades-long drift. Every foreign marriage was a political alliance. Every alliance came with a princess. Every princess brought her gods. And one by one, altar by altar, incense offering by incense offering, Solomon's heart turned. The text says it plainly. As Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father had been. Notice the comparison. Not as David. David was a deeply flawed man. He committed adultery and murder. But when confronted by the prophet Nathan, David's heart broke. He repented with everything he had. His heart, even in its worst moments, always came back to God. Solomon's heart didn't come back. It just kept drifting. He followed Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians. Ashtoreth worship involved temple prostitution and fertility rituals that were the exact opposite of everything God had commanded. He followed Molech, the detestable god of the Ammonites. He built high places for Chemosh on a hill east of Jerusalem and for Molech. He did this for all his foreign wives who burned incense and offered sacrifices to their gods. Think about what's happening here. The man who built the temple, the man who prayed that stunning prayer of dedication, the man to whom God appeared twice, personally, and spoke directly to. That man is now building altars to Molech, a deity associated with child sacrifice, on the hills outside Jerusalem, within sight of the temple he built for the living God. Every morning the sun would rise over Jerusalem, and its light would hit both the temple of the Lord and the high places of Molech, both visible, both built by the same man. That image tells you everything about where Solomon ended up, not in complete rejection of God, but in a grotesque compromise that tried to worship everything and therefore truly worshipped nothing. The Lord became angry with Solomon, and God's response was direct. "Since this is your attitude, and you have not kept my covenant and my decrees, which I commanded you, I will most certainly tear the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your subordinates." But then, even in judgment, grace. "Nevertheless, for the sake of David your father, I will not do it during your lifetime. I will tear it out of the hand of your son. Yet I will not tear the whole kingdom from him, but will give him one tribe for the sake of David my servant, and for the sake of Jerusalem, which I have chosen." For the sake of David. Even when Solomon failed completely, God remembered his promise to David. But the consequences were coming. They were just delayed. God raised up adversaries against Solomon. Hadad the Edomite, who had been a young boy when David's general Joab slaughtered every male in Edom. Hadad had escaped to Egypt, grown up in Pharaoh's court, married into the royal family, and now he returned to cause trouble. He had been nursing this grudge for decades. Then there was Rezon, son of Eliada, who had fled from his master and became the leader of a band of rebels. He settled in Damascus and became ruler of Aram. He was hostile toward Israel throughout Solomon's reign. The text says Rezon was Israel's adversary as long as Solomon lived, adding to the trouble caused by Hadad. So Rezon ruled in Aram and was hostile toward Israel. But the most significant enemy came from within Israel itself. His name was Jeroboam. Jeroboam was one of Solomon's own officials, a capable young man from the tribe of Ephraim. Solomon had put him in charge of the whole labor force of the tribes of Joseph. He saw how well Jeroboam did his work and gave him more responsibility. One day, as Jeroboam was leaving Jerusalem, the prophet Ahijah found him on the road. They were alone out in the countryside. Ahijah was wearing a new cloak. He took it off, tore it into 12 pieces, and said to Jeroboam, "Take 10 pieces for yourself, for this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. See, I am going to tear the kingdom out of Solomon's hand and give you 10 tribes. 10 pieces, 10 tribes, one for each." The visual was unmistakable. A prophet standing on a road, holding out a torn cloak, offering a kingdom to a government official. This is how God works. Not through armies or political campaigns, but through prophets on empty roads with torn garments. And then Ahijah explained God's reasoning. "I will do this because they have forsaken me and worshipped Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, Chemosh, the god of the Moabites, and Molech, the god of the Ammonites, and have not walked in obedience to me, nor done what is right in my eyes, nor kept my decrees and laws as David, Solomon's father, did." But even in judgment God was measured. One tribe would remain with Solomon's son, for the sake of David, for the sake of Jerusalem. And then God made Jeroboam the same conditional offer he had made to every leader before him. "If you do whatever I command you, and walk in obedience to me, and do what is right in my eyes, by obeying my decrees and commands, as David my servant did, I will be with you. I will build you a dynasty as enduring as the one I built for David, and will give Israel to you." The same promise, the same condition, the same opportunity. God was giving Jeroboam everything Solomon had, minus the wealth, plus a clear warning about what happens when you blow it. When Solomon found out about the prophecy, he tried to kill Jeroboam. But Jeroboam fled to Egypt, to Pharaoh Shishak. and stayed there until Solomon died. Solomon reigned in Jerusalem over all Israel for 40 years. Then he rested with his ancestors and was buried in the city of David, the wisest man who ever lived, given more than any human being before or after, and he blew it. But the worst was yet to come. Solomon was dead. His son Rehoboam went to Shechem, because all Israel had gone there to make him king. When Jeroboam heard about it in Egypt, he came back, and together with the whole assembly of Israel, they went to Rehoboam with a request. "Your father put a heavy yoke on us. Lighten the harsh labor and the heavy yoke he put on us, and we will serve you." Solomon's building projects had been magnificent, but the cost was enormous. Forced labor, heavy taxation. The people were tired. All they wanted was a little relief. Rehoboam said, "Go away for 3 days and then come back to me." He consulted the elders who had served his father Solomon. They said, "If today you will be a servant to these people and serve them and give them a favorable answer, they will always be your servants." Good advice, wise advice, advice that would have preserved the kingdom. Notice the word they used, servant. The way to keep power, they said, is to serve. That's a leadership principle that still holds true 3,000 years later. But Rehoboam rejected the advice the elders gave him. Instead, he consulted the young men who had grown up with him, his buddies, his crew, the guys who had never governed anything, never sacrificed anything, never built anything. And their advice was catastrophically stupid. They said, "Tell them, my little finger is thicker than my father's waist. My father laid on you a heavy yoke. I will make it even heavier. My father scourged you with whips. I will scourge you with scorpions." My little finger is thicker than my father's waist. That's not policy. That's ego. That's a young man who's never earned anything trying to prove he's tough. 3 days later, Jeroboam and all the people came back, and Rehoboam answered them harshly. He rejected the advice of the elders and followed the advice of the young men. The text makes sure you understand why. This turn of events was from the Lord to fulfill the word the Lord had spoken to Jeroboam through Ahijah the Shilonite. When all Israel saw that the king refused to listen to them, the people answered the king, "What share do we have in David? What part in Jesse's son? To your tents, Israel. Look after your own house, David." The nation split. 10 tribes followed Jeroboam. Only Judah remained with the house of David. One conversation, one arrogant answer, and the kingdom Solomon built was torn in two. Think about that for a moment. David fought for decades to unite the 12 tribes. Solomon spent 40 years and unimaginable resources building a kingdom that was the envy of every nation, and Rehoboam destroyed it in a single afternoon because he listened to his friends instead of his father's advisors. This is one of the Bible's clearest lessons about leadership. The people weren't asking for freedom, they weren't rebelling, they were asking to be heard. All Rehoboam had to do was lower the tax burden slightly and speak with respect, and the kingdom would have stayed intact. Instead, he chose posturing over wisdom and lost 83% of his kingdom. King Rehoboam sent out Adoniram, who was in charge of forced labor, but all Israel stoned him to death. Rehoboam himself had to jump in his chariot and flee back to Jerusalem. The very system of forced labor that had caused the rebellion now killed its own administrator. Rehoboam assembled an army of 180,000 fighting men from Judah and Benjamin to go to war against Israel and bring the kingdom back. But God sent the prophet Shemaiah with a message. "This is what the Lord says. Do not go up to fight against your brothers, the Israelites. Go home, every one of you, for this is my doing." This is my doing. God takes responsibility for it. He had warned Solomon. He had told Jeroboam through Ahijah. The split wasn't an accident or a tragedy that caught God off guard. It was judgment. Precise, controlled, prophesied judgment. Painful, but purposeful. They obeyed. They went home. But the damage was done. From this point forward, there are two kingdoms. The northern kingdom, called Israel, with 10 tribes under Jeroboam, and the southern kingdom, called Judah, with the tribe of Judah and the tiny tribe of Benjamin under the house of David. 2 nations, 2 capitals, 2 sets of kings, and increasingly 2 different destinies. And what Jeroboam does next will poison the northern kingdom for the rest of its existence. Now, here's where you'd expect the story to improve. Jeroboam had 10 tribes. He had God's promise through the prophet Ahijah. He had a chance to do things right. God had literally handed him a kingdom and said, "If you do whatever I command you, walk in obedience to me, and do what is right in my eyes, I will build you a dynasty as enduring as the one I built for David." But Jeroboam got scared. He thought, if these people go up to offer sacrifices at the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem, they will give their allegiance back to Rehoboam, king of Judah. They will kill me and return to him. Fear. That's what drove it. Not logic, not wisdom. Fear. So Jeroboam came up with a plan that would echo through centuries of Israelite history. He made 2 golden calves. He set one up in Bethel and the other in Dan. And he told the people, "It is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Here are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." The exact same words, almost word for word, the same declaration that Aaron made when he built the golden calf in the wilderness while Moses was on Mount Sinai receiving the law. "Here are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." The same sin, the same rebellion, the same words, centuries later, in a different place, with a different leader, the same terrible choice. And just like with Aaron's golden calf, the people went along with it. The text says, the people went as far as Dan to worship the one there. They made the journey. They bowed down. They abandoned the temple in Jerusalem and the priesthood God had established, all because their king told them it was too far to walk. But Jeroboam wasn't done. He built shrines on high places throughout the land. He appointed priests from all sorts of people, even though they were not Levites. God had specifically designated the tribe of Levi to serve as priests. Jeroboam threw that out and appointed whoever was willing. He wanted priests who owed their position to him, not to God. That way, they'd serve his agenda, not God's. He also instituted a festival on the 15th day of the 8th month, like the festival held in Judah, but on a different date. A counterfeit holy day. He offered sacrifices on the altar himself. Everything about his religious system was a copy, a knockoff version of what God had established, close enough to feel familiar but corrupted at its core. And the text delivers its verdict with a phrase that will repeat over and over throughout the rest of 1 Kings and 2 Kings, like a drumbeat of condemnation. This was the sin of the house of Jeroboam that led to its downfall and to its destruction from the face of the earth. Every single king of the northern kingdom who came after Jeroboam would be measured against this moment. He walked in the ways of Jeroboam. He did not turn away from the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, which he had caused Israel to commit. Over and over and over, like a curse that wouldn't lift. The golden calves became the original sin of the northern kingdom, the point of no return that contaminated everything that followed. God sent a man of God from Judah to Bethel, right while Jeroboam was standing by the altar making offerings. And this unnamed prophet cried out against the altar, "Altar, altar, this is what the Lord says. A son named Josiah will be born to the house of David. On you he will sacrifice the priests of the high places who make offerings here, and human bones will be burned on you." That prophecy was fulfilled almost 300 years later. Josiah did exactly what this prophet predicted, 3 centuries in advance. And the text names the king by name. Jeroboam stretched out his hand from the altar and said, "Seize him." But the hand he stretched out shriveled up, and he couldn't pull it back. The altar split apart, and the ashes poured out, just as the man of God had predicted. Jeroboam begged the prophet to pray for the restoration of his hand. The prophet prayed, and the hand was restored. Did Jeroboam repent? Did he tear down the calves? Did he acknowledge the God who just shriveled his hand and healed it in front of everyone? No. The text says, "Even after this, Jeroboam did not change his evil ways." That line might be the most frustrating sentence in the whole book. Now, what I'm about to walk you through is going to feel fast, and that's on purpose, because the northern kingdom went through kings the way most people go through phone charges. Assassinations, coups, a king who lasted 7 days, and a suicide by fire. It's chaos, but you need to see the full picture because it all leads to one couple who made everyone before them look like amateurs. What follows in the text is a rapid-fire succession of kings in both the northern and southern kingdoms. And honestly, it reads like a catalogue of failure. In Judah, Rehoboam reigned 17 years. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord. The people engaged in every kind of detestable practice. They set up for themselves high places, sacred stones, and Asherah poles on every high hill and under every spreading tree. There were even male shrine prostitutes in the land. The people engaged in all the detestable practices of the nations the Lord had driven out before the Israelites. Then in the 5th year of Rehoboam's reign, Pharaoh Shishak attacked Jerusalem. This wasn't a small raid. This was the might of Egypt coming against the city David had conquered and Solomon had glorified. Shishak carried off the treasures of the temple and the royal palace. He took everything, including the gold shields Solomon had made. Rehoboam replaced them with bronze shields. Think about that symbolism, gold to bronze, in one generation. The shields that Solomon had made, each one containing 600 shekels of gold, replaced with cheap imitations. Every time the guard carried those bronze shields, it was a visible reminder of what had been lost. The glory was fading, and everyone could see it. Rehoboam and Jeroboam were at war with each other throughout their reigns. The united kingdom that David and Solomon built was now 2 nations locked in perpetual conflict. Brothers fighting brothers. The dream was over. Rehoboam's son Abijam reigned 3 years. He committed all the sins his father had committed before him. His heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father had been. Only for David's sake did God keep a lamp burning in Jerusalem. That phrase, "for David's sake," shows up again and again in the text. God's faithfulness to a man who died years ago was the only thing keeping the line alive. Then came Asa, and finally, a glimmer of hope. Asa did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, as his father David had done. He expelled the male shrine prostitutes from the land and got rid of all the idols his ancestors had made. He even deposed his own grandmother Maacah from her position as queen mother because she had made a repulsive Asherah pole. He cut it down and burned it in the Kidron Valley. That took courage. Deposing your own grandmother, the queen mother, one of the most powerful people in the kingdom, that's not a political decision. That's a conviction so deep that family loyalty couldn't override it. Asa was serious about reform. Asa's heart was fully committed to the Lord all his life, but the high places were not removed. The people continued to offer sacrifices and burn incense there. Still, a good king, a faithful king, for 41 years. a beacon in the south, while the north descended into chaos. Because in the north, things were catastrophic. Jeroboam's son Nadab became king and reigned 2 years, did evil. Baasha conspired against him, killed him, and took the throne. Then Baasha killed every member of Jeroboam's family. Not one person from Jeroboam's line survived. Just as the prophet Ahijah had predicted, Baasha reigned 24 years, did evil, walked in the ways of Jeroboam. Baasha's son Elah became king, reigned 2 years. His official Zimri, who commanded half his chariots, conspired against him. While Elah was in Tirzah getting drunk at the house of the man in charge of the palace, Zimri walked in and killed him. Then Zimri destroyed Baasha's entire family, every male relative and friend, gone. Zimri was king for 7 days. 7 days. That's the shortest reign of any king in Israel's history. When the army, camped against the Philistines at Gibbethon, heard that Zimri had murdered the king, they proclaimed their commander Omri as king. Omri marched on Tirzah. When Zimri saw that the city was taken, he went into the citadel of the royal palace and set the palace on fire around him. He died in the flames, 7 days on the throne, then suicide by fire. That's Zimri's entire legacy. The text has time to give us exactly 4 verses about his reign. Murdered his way to power, lost it immediately, and burned himself alive rather than face the consequences. If you ever wanted proof that political power gained through violence doesn't last, Zimri is your Exhibit A. But even Zimri's fall wasn't clean. After his death, the people of Israel were divided. Half followed Tibni son of Ginath and wanted to make him king. The other half supported Omri. Civil war within a civil war. Eventually, Omri's followers proved stronger than those of Tibni, who died. The text doesn't say how, but given the pattern of this section, died probably doesn't mean peacefully in his sleep. Omri became king and was actually a significant figure historically. He moved the capital from Tirzah to a hill he bought for 2 talents of silver and built a new city there. He named it Samaria. This becomes the capital of the northern kingdom for the rest of its existence, and the name Samaria eventually refers to the entire region. Archaeologically, the Moabite stone discovered in 1868 mentions Omri by name. The Assyrians referred to Israel as the land of Omri for over a century after his death. By ancient Near Eastern standards, he was a major king. But the Bible's verdict is brief and brutal. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord and sinned more than all those before him. He followed completely the ways of Jeroboam son of Nebat, committing the same sin Jeroboam had caused Israel to commit, so that they aroused the anger of the Lord, the God of Israel, by their worthless idols. Then Omri's son took the throne, and this is where the story shifts dramatically, because Omri's son married a woman from Sidon, and together they would push Israel to the brink of total spiritual annihilation. His name was Ahab. Her name was Jezebel. And what they did to Israel makes everything that came before look mild by comparison. The text does not mince words. Ahab son of Omri did more evil in the eyes of the Lord than any of those before him. Not just evil, more evil than everyone who came before. In a line of kings that included murderers, idol worshippers, and a man who burned himself alive, Ahab managed to be worse than all of them. He married Jezebel, daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Sidonians, and then he began to serve Baal and worship him. He set up an altar for Baal in the temple of Baal that he built in Samaria. He also made an Asherah pole. The text says, Ahab did more to arouse the anger of the Lord, the God of Israel, than did all the kings of Israel before him. Jezebel wasn't just an idol worshipper, she was an activist for Baal worship. She systematically hunted down and killed the prophets of the Lord. She used state power to eliminate the worship of God and replace it with Baal worship. She fed 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of Asherah at her table. That's 850 false prophets on the royal payroll. Meanwhile, God's prophets were hiding in caves, being fed bread and water in secret by Obadiah, one of Ahab's own officials who still feared the Lord. Obadiah had personally hidden 100 of them in 2 caves, 50 in each, and supplied them with food and water at great personal risk. He was a senior government official, the man in charge of Ahab's palace, secretly running an underground railroad for profits while his queen hunted them like animals. The contrast is staggering. 850 prophets of false gods dining at the queen's table, funded by the state, celebrated by the court, and the prophets of the true God, hiding in caves, eating bread and water, hoping Jezebel's death squads didn't find them. Also during this time, a man named Heel of Bethel rebuilt Jericho. When he laid its foundations, his firstborn son, Abiram, died. When he set up its gates, his youngest son, Segub, died. The text says this happened in accordance with the word of the Lord spoken by Joshua, son of Nun. Joshua had pronounced a curse on anyone who would rebuild Jericho centuries earlier, and even now that word held. God's promises don't expire, neither do his warnings. Israel had hit rock bottom. The temple was in the south, in Judah, out of reach for most northern Israelites. The golden calves were in Bethel and Dan. Baal worship was the state religion. God's prophets were hunted like criminals. But God wasn't done. He was about to send someone, and this someone would be different from anything Israel had ever seen. The transition in the text is stunning. No introduction, no backstory, no genealogy, no calling narrative like Moses at the burning bush or Samuel in the tabernacle. Just a single verse that drops like a thunderbolt into the middle of the darkness. Now Elijah the Tishbite from Tishbe in Gilead said to Ahab, "As the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years except at my word." That's it. That's how Elijah enters the Bible. A man from nowhere, from Tishbe in Gilead, a region east of the Jordan that was basically the middle of nowhere. No royal connections, no priestly lineage, no army behind him. Just a man from the wilderness, walking into the throne room of the most powerful and most wicked king in Israel's history and announcing a drought. Not a possibility, not a threat, not a negotiation, a declaration. There will be neither dew nor rain except at my word. The audacity of that statement is hard to overstate. Baal was specifically the storm god, the god of rain, the god of fertility and agricultural abundance. Elijah was essentially saying to Ahab, "Your God controls the rain. Let's test that. Starting now, the sky is shut, and it stays shut until I say otherwise." In an agricultural society, no rain means no crops. No crops means no food. No food means famine. Elijah was essentially pronouncing a death sentence on the nation, and he did it to prove that the God of Israel, not Baal, controls the heavens, and then he walked out. After Elijah delivered his message, God told him to leave, not to stay and fight, not to organize a resistance, to hide. Leave here, turn eastward, and hide in the Kerith ravine, east of the Jordan. You will drink from the brook, and I have directed the ravens to supply you with food there. There's something important in this. Elijah had just done the boldest thing any prophet had ever done, walking into the king's palace and shutting down the sky. And God's first instruction was to go sit by a brook and let birds feed him. After the most courageous moment of his life, God sent him into isolation and dependency. Ravens. God commanded ravens to feed a man. In the law of Moses, ravens were unclean birds. They were scavengers. They weren't supposed to be on any Israelite's plate, much less serving as God's delivery service. But God used them. Every morning and every evening the ravens brought Elijah bread and meat. He drank from the brook. Imagine that daily routine. You're a prophet hiding from a king who wants you dead. You're sitting by a shrinking brook in a dry ravine, and twice a day, unclean birds show up with fresh bread and meat in their beaks. It's absurd, it's undignified, and it's a perfect illustration of how God provides. Not always in the way you'd choose, not always through the channels you'd expect, but faithfully, consistently, enough for today. But eventually, the brook dried up because there had been no rain. The very drought Elijah had declared was now affecting him personally. God didn't exempt his prophet from the consequences. He led him through them. And God gave Elijah new instructions. Go at once to Zarephath in the region of Sidon and stay there. I have directed a widow there to supply you with food. Zarephath in Sidon. Think about this for a moment. That's Jezebel's home territory. The queen who was hunting God's prophets came from Sidon, and God was sending his prophet right into the heart of her homeland to be sustained by a pagan widow. The irony is intentional and pointed. While Jezebel was using the resources of Israel to feed 850 false prophets, God was sending his prophet to her homeland to be fed by a woman with almost nothing. When Elijah arrived at Zarephath, he found the widow gathering sticks. He asked for water and bread. Her response was heartbreaking. As surely as the Lord your God lives, I don't have any bread, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little olive oil in a jug. I am gathering a few sticks to take home and make a meal for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die. She was preparing her last meal, her final act as a mother. Cook what's left, feed her child one more time, then wait for death. Elijah said, Don't be afraid. Go home and do as you have said, but first make a small loaf of bread for me from what you have and bring it to me, and then make something for yourself and your son. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. The jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day the Lord sends rain on the land. She went and did as Elijah had told her, and every day there was food. The jar of flour was not used up. The jug of oil did not run dry. Day after day after day. In the middle of a famine that was devastating the entire region, one widow and her son and a prophet from Israel had food every single day. But then something terrible happened. The widow's son became ill. He grew worse and worse and finally stopped breathing. The boy died. The widow turned to Elijah in anguish. What do you have against me, man of God? Did you come to remind me of my sin and kill my son? Elijah took the boy from her arms, carried him to the upper room, and laid him on his bed. And then he prayed, Lord my God, have you brought tragedy even on this widow I am staying with by causing her son to die? 3 times he stretched himself out on the boy. 3 times he cried to the Lord, Lord my God, let this boy's life return to him. The Lord heard Elijah's cry, and the boy's life returned to him. He lived. Elijah carried the boy back down and said to his mother, Look, your son is alive. The widow's response, Now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord from your mouth is the truth. This woman from Sidon, from Jezebel's country, recognized what the king and queen of Israel refused to see, that the God of Israel is the true God. 3 years into the drought, the famine was severe in Samaria. The land was dying, cattle were dying, people were dying, and Ahab, the king who caused all of it by turning to Baal, was not on his knees repenting. He was out looking for grass. The text tells us that Ahab called Obadiah, who was in charge of his palace, and said, Go through the land to all the springs and valleys. Maybe we can find some grass to keep the horses and mules alive so we will not have to kill any of our animals." The king of Israel's priority during a national famine was saving his horses, not his people, his horses. They divided the land between them. Ahab went in one direction, Obadiah in another. And as Obadiah was walking, Elijah met him. Obadiah recognized him, fell face down and said, "Is it really you, my lord Elijah?" Obadiah was terrified. He explained that Ahab had searched every nation and kingdom looking for Elijah. He'd made each nation swear they hadn't seen the prophet. If Obadiah told Ahab that Elijah was here, and then the Spirit of the Lord carried Elijah away somewhere, Ahab would kill Obadiah for giving false information. Elijah's response was calm and absolute. "As the Lord Almighty lives, whom I serve, I will surely present myself to Ahab today." The meeting between Ahab and Elijah is electric. Ahab's opening line when he saw Elijah: "Is that you, you troubler of Israel?" Elijah's response was fearless. "I have not made trouble for Israel, but you and your father's family have. You have abandoned the Lord's commands and have followed the Baals." Then Elijah issued a challenge that would become one of the most dramatic confrontations in the entire Bible. "Now summon the people from all over Israel to meet me on Mount Carmel, and bring the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table." Mount Carmel, an elevated ridge overlooking the Mediterranean Sea, the perfect stage for what was about to happen. Ahab sent word throughout all Israel and assembled the prophets on Mount Carmel. And Elijah stood before the people and said something that must have cut like a knife. "How long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him." The text says the people said nothing. Nothing. Complete silence. Not one person in all of Israel was willing to stand up and declare who they served. The fear of Jezebel, the confusion of years of mixed worship, the cowardice of a nation that had forgotten who it was. Elijah said, "I am the only one of the Lord's prophets left, but Baal has 450 prophets. Get 2 bulls for us. Let Baal's prophets choose one for themselves, and let them cut it into pieces and put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. I will prepare the other bull and put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. Then you call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord, the God who answers by fire. He is God." All the people agreed. "What you say is good." The prophets of Baal went first. They took the bull, prepared it, and called on the name of Baal from morning till noon. "Baal, answer us," they shouted. But there was no response. No one answered. They danced around the altar they had made. Think about the scene. 450 men, professional prophets, men who had the backing of the queen and the power of the state, screaming at the sky for hours, jumping, dancing, working themselves into a frenzy, and nothing, absolute silence from heaven. At noon, Elijah began to taunt them. And this is one of those moments in the Bible where you can hear the sarcasm dripping from every word. "Shout louder! Surely he is a god. Perhaps he is deep in thought, or busy, or traveling. Maybe he is sleeping and must be awakened." The Hebrew here is even more biting than most translations suggest. "Perhaps he is deep in thought" is sometimes translated as "perhaps he has gone aside," which in ancient Hebrew idiom could mean he's using the bathroom. Elijah was publicly mocking their God in the most humiliating terms possible. So they shouted louder and slashed themselves with swords and spears, as was their custom, until their blood flowed. This was standard Baal worship, the belief that self-harm and blood sacrifice could awaken a god's attention. 450 men cutting themselves open, bleeding onto the mountain, screaming for a God who would never answer. Midday passed, and they continued their frantic prophesying until the time for the evening sacrifice. But there was no response, no one answered, no one paid attention. 3 phrases. No response, no one answered, no one paid attention. Complete, total, devastating silence. Hours of desperate worship, and Baal couldn't even manage a spark. Then Elijah said to all the people, "Come here to me." They came to him, and he repaired the altar of the Lord, which had been torn down. He took 12 stones, one for each of the tribes descended from Jacob. With the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord. Then he did something that made absolutely no sense. He dug a trench around the altar, large enough to hold about 15 quarts of seed. He arranged the wood, cut the bull into pieces, and laid it on the wood. Then he said, "Fill 4 large jars with water and pour it on the offering and on the wood." They did it. "Do it again," he said, and they did it again. "Do it a 3rd time," he ordered, and they did it the 3rd time. The water ran down around the altar and even filled the trench. In the middle of a 3-year drought, Elijah was pouring water on his sacrifice, soaking it, making it as difficult as humanly possible for fire to catch, eliminating every possible accusation of trickery. At the time of sacrifice, Elijah stepped forward and prayed, not a long theatrical prayer, not hours of shouting and dancing, a simple, direct appeal. "Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and have done all these things at your command. Answer me, Lord, answer me, so these people will know that you, Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again." Then the fire of the Lord fell. It burned up the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and the soil. It licked up the water in the trench. Read that again. It burned the stones, it burned the soil, it evaporated the water. This wasn't just a fire. This was a supernatural display of power that left absolutely nothing to question. When all the people saw this, they fell prostrate and cried, "The Lord, He is God! The Lord, He is God!" Elijah commanded them to seize the prophets of Baal. Not one of them was to escape. They brought them down to the Kishon Valley, and Elijah had them put to death there. Then Elijah told Ahab, "Go, eat and drink, for there is the sound of a heavy rain." While Ahab went to eat and drink, Elijah climbed to the top of Carmel, bent down to the ground, and put his face between his knees. He told his servant, "Go and look toward the sea." The servant went and looked. "There is nothing there," he said. 7 times Elijah said, "Go back." The 7th time the servant reported, "A cloud as small as a man's hand is rising from the sea." Elijah said, "Go and tell Ahab, hitch up your chariot and go down before the rain stops you." Meanwhile the sky grew black with clouds, the wind rose, and a heavy rain came. Ahab rode off to Jezreel, and the power of the Lord came on Elijah, and tucking his cloak into his belt, he ran ahead of Ahab all the way to Jezreel. He outran a chariot. After the most physically and emotionally exhausting day of his life, the Spirit of God empowered him to literally outrun a horse-drawn chariot. And now we come to one of the most surprising and human moments in the entire Bible. Because after all of that, after the fire from heaven, after the rain, after outrunning a chariot, after the greatest victory a prophet had ever seen, Elijah fell apart. Ahab told Jezebel everything Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets of Baal with the sword. Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah saying, "May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of them." One threat from a queen. That's all it took. Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. not a strategic retreat, not a calculated withdrawal. He ran. Pure panic-driven flight. He went to Beersheba in Judah, about 100 miles south of Jezreel. He left his servant there, and then went another day's journey into the wilderness. Alone. He wanted to be completely, utterly alone. He came to a broom bush, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. "I have had enough, Lord. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors." The man who called down fire from heaven wanted to die. The prophet who stood alone against 450 false prophets, and one who outran a chariot, who shut up the sky for 3 years, was now sitting under a desert bush, begging God to end his life. This is not weakness, and it's not a contradiction. This is what being human looks like. The highest highs can lead to the lowest lows. Exhaustion, isolation, and the crushing weight of feeling like nothing has actually changed, those things can break anyone, even a man who just saw God answer with fire. God's response to Elijah's depression is one of the most tender moments in Scripture. He didn't rebuke him, he didn't lecture him, he fed him. An angel touched Elijah and said, "Get up and eat." There by his head was some bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and drank and lay down again. The angel came back a second time. "Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you." So Elijah ate and drank. Strengthened by that food, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God, the same mountain where Moses received the 10 Commandments. At Horeb, Elijah went into a cave and spent the night, and God came to him with a question. "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He answered, "I have been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, torn down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. I am the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too." God said, "Go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper, a still small voice, not thunder, not lightning, not earthquake or fire. A whisper. After all the cosmic power and supernatural display, God's actual presence came in the quietest possible form. There's a profound message here that the text lets you discover on your own. On Mount Carmel, Elijah had experienced God in fire, and it was spectacular. But fire alone didn't change Israel's heart. The people fell prostrate and declared, "The Lord, He is God." And then, within hours, Jezebel's single threat sent Elijah running for his life. The spectacle didn't last. The fireworks didn't produce lasting faith. But here, in a cave, after wind and earthquake and fire, God comes in a whisper. And that whisper is what actually sustains Elijah. That whisper gives him his next assignment. That whisper tells him he's not alone. The whisper is more powerful than the fire ever was. When Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face and went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. He covered his face out of reverence. On Mount Carmel, he had been bold, taunting, aggressive. Here, in the presence of a whisper, he was humbled. God asked the same question. "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Elijah gave the same answer. Same pain, same self-pity, same sense of abandonment. He was still stuck, but God didn't give up on him. God responded with instructions. Go back. There's work to do. Anoint Hazael as king over Aram. Anoint Jehu as king over Israel. Anoint Elisha son of Shaphat from Abel Meholah to succeed you as prophet. 3 anointings, 3 instruments of God's ongoing judgment and mercy. Elijah wasn't done. His story wasn't over. And most importantly, the mission didn't depend on Elijah alone. God was already raising up the next generation. And then God corrected Elijah's loneliness. "Yet I reserve 7,000 in Israel, all whose knees have not bowed down to Baal, and whose mouths have not kissed him." 7,000. Elijah thought he was alone. He thought the whole nation had abandoned God. But God had 7,000 faithful people that Elijah didn't even know about. You are never as alone as you think you are. Elijah left Horeb and found Elisha, son of Shaphat. He was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen, and he himself was driving the 12th pair. 12 yoke of oxen. This wasn't a poor farmer. This was a wealthy family's operation. Elijah walked up to him and threw his cloak around him. That's it. No speech, no explanation, no formal calling, just a cloak thrown over a young man's shoulders. But Elisha understood immediately what it meant. He left the oxen and ran after Elijah. "Let me kiss my father and mother goodbye," he said, "and then I will come with you." Elisha went back. He took his yoke of oxen and slaughtered them. He burned the plowing equipment to cook the meat and gave it to the people, and they ate. Then he set out to follow Elijah and became his servant. He slaughtered his oxen, burned his equipment. He didn't leave a way back. He didn't keep his old life as a backup plan. He destroyed his former livelihood and fed it to his community. That's commitment. That's the kind of total bridge-burning surrender that says, "I'm all in." Now, before we get to Naboth's vineyard and Ahab's death, the text records two major battles with Ben-Hadad, king of Aram. And these stories reveal something complicated about Ahab, because even the worst kings sometimes get chances they don't deserve. Ben-Hadad mustered his entire army. 32 kings were with him, along with horses and chariots. He marched up and besieged Samaria. He sent messengers to Ahab demanding his silver, gold, wives and children. Ahab's initial response was submissive. "Just as you say, my lord the king, I and all I have are yours." But Ben-Hadad pushed further. He demanded the right to send his officials into the palace to take whatever they wanted personally. This was too much. Ahab consulted his elders, and they advised resistance. Then God sent a prophet to Ahab with an unexpected message. "This is what the Lord says. Do you see this vast army? I will give it into your hand today, and then you will know that I am the Lord." Even to Ahab, even after everything, God still reached out, still gave him chances to recognize the true God, still fought for Israel despite its king's unfaithfulness. Israel won a decisive victory. The Arameans fled. Ben-Hadad escaped on horseback. The prophet came back and warned Ahab, "Strengthen your position and see what must be done, because next spring the king of Aram will attack you again." Sure enough, Ben-Hadad attacked again the following year. His officials had told him that Israel's gods were gods of the hills, so they should fight on the plains. The Aramean army was vast. The Israelites were camped opposite them, looking like two small flocks of goats against an army covering the countryside. A man of God came to Ahab again. "This is what the Lord says. Because the Arameans think the Lord is a God of the hills and not a God of the valleys, I will deliver this vast army into your hands, and you will know that I am the Lord." Israel inflicted 100,000 casualties in one day. The rest fled to Aphek, where the wall collapsed on 27,000 of them. Ben-Hadad hid in an inner room. But then Ahab made a fatal error. Instead of destroying Ben-Hadad as God had intended, Ahab made a treaty with him. He called Ben-Hadad "my brother" and let him go, in exchange for the return of some cities and trading rights in Damascus. God sent another prophet, disguised, to confront Ahab. Through a parable, the prophet revealed God's verdict. "This is what the Lord says. You have set free a man I had determined should die. Therefore it is your life for his life, your people for his people." Ahab went home sullen and angry, the same response he'd have later over Naboth's vineyard. When things didn't go his way, he didn't repent. He pouted. The story now shifts to one of the most disturbing episodes in the entire book, and it reveals the true nature of Ahab and Jezebel's reign. There was a man named Naboth who owned a vineyard in Jezreel right next to the palace. Ahab wanted that vineyard. He went to Naboth and said, "Let me have your vineyard to use for a vegetable garden, since it is close to my palace. In exchange, I will give you a better vineyard, or, if you prefer, I will pay you whatever it is worth." Naboth's answer was based on principle, not stubbornness. "The Lord forbid that I should give you the inheritance of my ancestors." Under Israelite law, ancestral land was meant to stay in the family. It was tied to tribal identity and God's original distribution of the promised land. Naboth wasn't being difficult. He was obeying God's law. Ahab went home, sullen and angry. He lay on his bed, turned his face to the wall, and refused to eat. The king of Israel, the most powerful man in the nation, pouting like a child because he couldn't have a vegetable garden. Jezebel found him like this and asked what was wrong. When he told her, her response was chilling. "Is this how you act as king over Israel? Get up and eat. Cheer up. I'll get you the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite." She wrote letters in Ahab's name, sealed them with his seal, and sent them to the elders and nobles of Naboth's city. The instructions were precise. Proclaim a day of fasting. Seat Naboth in a prominent place among the people. Have 2 scoundrels sit opposite him and testify that he has cursed both God and the king. Then take him out and stone him to death. Notice how calculated this is. Jezebel didn't just send soldiers to kill Naboth. That would be too obvious. She wrapped murder in the disguise of religious duty and legal process. A fast, which implied that someone's sin had brought trouble on the community. A public hearing, which gave the appearance of due process. 2 witnesses, which met the legal requirement under Mosaic law, and the charge of blasphemy, which carried an automatic death sentence. Every step was designed to make murder look like justice. The elders and nobles of the city went along with it. They knew what was happening. They knew Naboth was innocent. But when the queen sends you a letter sealed with the king's seal and the instructions are this specific, you understand what happens to people who disobey. They did exactly as Jezebel commanded. Naboth was falsely accused, dragged outside the city, and stoned to death. The book of 2 Kings later reveals that Naboth's sons were killed too. Jezebel wasn't just taking a vineyard, she was eliminating an entire family line, so no one could legally challenge the land transfer. An innocent man and his children murdered through state-sponsored judicial corruption so the king could have a vegetable garden. This is what power looks like when it has no conscience. This is what happens when a nation's leaders view God's laws as obstacles to be manipulated rather than boundaries to be respected. When Jezebel heard that Naboth was dead, she told Ahab, "Get up and take possession of the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite that he refused to sell you. He is no longer alive, but dead." Notice she doesn't say, "I had him killed." She says, "He is no longer alive." Passive, clean, as if Naboth's death were some natural occurrence rather than a carefully orchestrated murder. Ahab got up and went to take possession. He walked into a dead man's vineyard and started planning his garden. But God sent Elijah. Elijah met Ahab in the vineyard. Ahab's first words are revealing. "So you have found me, my enemy?" Elijah's response was devastating. "I have found you because you have sold yourself to do evil in the eyes of the Lord." He says, "I am going to bring disaster on you. I will wipe out your descendants and cut off from Ahab every last male in Israel, slave or free." I will make your house like the house of Jeroboam and the house of Baasha, because you have aroused my anger and caused Israel to sin. And about Jezebel. Dogs will devour Jezebel by the wall of Jezreel. When Ahab heard these words, something unexpected happened. He tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, fasted, lay in sackcloth, and went around meekly. He repented. After everything, after the Baal worship, after Mount Carmel, after Naboth's murder. The worst king in Israel's history actually humbled himself before God. And God noticed. Have you noticed how Ahab has humbled himself before me? Because he has humbled himself, I will not bring this disaster in his day, but I will bring it on his house in the days of his son. Even for Ahab there was a measure of mercy. Not forgiveness of the consequences, but a delay. God responded to even the smallest, most imperfect repentance from the worst possible person. The final chapters of 1 Kings deal with Ahab's wars against Aram and his death, and they contain one of the most psychologically revealing sequences in the entire book. For 3 years there was peace between Aram and Israel. Then Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, came to visit Ahab. Jehoshaphat had made peace with Ahab, and his son had even married Ahab's daughter. Ahab asked Jehoshaphat, "Will you go with me to fight against Ramoth-Gilead?" Ramoth-Gilead was an Israelite city that the Arameans still held, despite Ben-Hadad's treaty promise to return it. Jehoshaphat agreed, saying, "I am as you are, my people as your people, my horses as your horses." But he added something that revealed his character. First, seek the counsel of the Lord. Ahab assembled about 400 prophets. Not prophets of the Lord, court prophets, yes men. "Shall I go to war against Ramoth-Gilead, or shall I refrain?" he asked. "Go," they answered, "for the Lord will give it into the king's hand." One of them, Zedekiah son of Chenaanah, even made iron horns and declared, "This is what the Lord says, with these you will gore the Arameans until they are destroyed." All 400 were unanimous. Victory was certain, but Jehoshaphat wasn't convinced. Something felt off. There's a lesson here about discernment. When 400 people are all telling a powerful man exactly what he wants to hear, that's not prophecy, that's politics. Jehoshaphat could smell the difference. "Is there no longer a prophet of the Lord here whom we can inquire of?" he asked. Ahab's answer is almost comical in its honesty. "There is still one prophet through whom we can inquire of the Lord, but I hate him because he never prophesies anything good about me, but always bad. He is Micaiah son of Imlah." The king of Israel openly admitted that he preferred 400 liars to one truth-teller. He knew Micaiah spoke the truth. That's exactly why he hated him. They summoned Micaiah. The messenger who went to get him said, "Look, the other prophets without exception are predicting success for the king. Let your word agree with theirs and speak favorably." Micaiah said, "As surely as the Lord lives, I can tell him only what the Lord tells me." When Micaiah arrived, Ahab asked him, "Shall we go to war against Ramoth-Gilead or not?" Micaiah's initial answer was sarcastic. "Attack and be victorious, for the Lord will give it into the king's hand." He was mocking the 400 prophets, and Ahab knew it. Ahab said, "How many times must I make you swear to tell me nothing but the truth in the name of the Lord?" So Micaiah told the truth. "I saw all Israel scattered on the hills like sheep without a shepherd, and the Lord said, 'These people have no master. Let each one go home in peace.'" Ahab turned to Jehoshaphat. "Didn't I tell you that he never prophesies anything good about me, but only bad?" But Micaiah wasn't done. He described a vision of the Lord sitting on his throne with all the host of heaven around him. God asked, "Who will entice Ahab into attacking Ramoth-Gilead and going to his death there?" Various spirits suggested different things. Then a spirit came forward. "I will entice him. I will go out and be a deceiving spirit in the mouths of all his prophets." The Lord said, "You will succeed in enticing him. Go and do it." Micaiah told this to Ahab's face. "So now the Lord has put a deceiving spirit in the mouths of all these prophets of yours. The Lord has decreed disaster for you." Zedekiah, one of the 400, walked up and slapped Micaiah across the face. "Which way did the Spirit from the Lord go when he went from me to speak to you?" Micaiah answered, "You will find out on the day you go to hide in an inner room." Ahab ordered Micaiah thrown in prison and fed nothing but bread and water until the king returned safely. Micaiah's final words: "If you ever return safely, the Lord has not spoken through me. Mark my words, all you people." Ahab went to battle anyway, but he tried to cheat fate. He disguised himself and went into battle dressed as a common soldier, while Jehoshaphat wore his royal robes. Think about the cowardice in this. Ahab heard God's verdict through Micaiah, and instead of repenting, he tried to outsmart God. He put on a common soldier's armor, essentially hiding behind his troops. And he put Jehoshaphat, his ally, in royal robes, making the Judean king a target. He was using Jehoshaphat as a decoy, a human shield. The king of Aram had ordered his 32 chariot commanders, "Don't fight with anyone, small or great, except the king of Israel." They were hunting specifically for Ahab. When they saw Jehoshaphat in his royal robes, they thought he was the king of Israel and turned to attack him. But when Jehoshaphat cried out, they realized he wasn't Ahab and turned away. Jehoshaphat survived. Barely. But someone drew his bow at random and hit the king of Israel between the sections of his armor. The shot was perfect. Not aimed, not targeted. A random arrow, fired by an unnamed soldier who had no idea who he was shooting at, found the tiny gap between Ahab's armor plates. There is no hiding from God's judgment. You can disguise yourself. You can manipulate your friends. You can put an entire army between you and the consequences. But a random arrow, guided by the hand of a God whose word never fails, will find you. Ahab told his chariot driver, "Wheel around and get me out of the fighting. I've been wounded." But the battle raged all day. The king was propped up in his chariot facing the Arameans, the blood from his wound pooling in the bottom of the chariot. He stood there all day, wounded, bleeding, watching his army fight the battle he started, unable to escape the death God had declared through his prophet. As the sun was setting, a cry spread through the army. "Every man to his town, every man to his land." The king was dead. They brought Ahab back to Samaria and buried him there. They washed the chariot at a pool in Samaria, and the dogs licked up his blood, just as the word of the Lord had declared. Every prophecy fulfilled, every word proven true. The man who hated the prophet who told him the truth died exactly as that prophet said he would. And that's where the book of 1 Kings ends, not with resolution, not with a happy ending, but with a kingdom divided, a line of mostly terrible kings, the death of the worst king in Israel's history, and the lingering question of what happens next. But step back and look at the entire arc of what we just covered, because the pattern in this book is breathtaking in its consistency. At the beginning, we saw a kingdom at its peak. David on his deathbed, passing the throne to Solomon. The wisest man in history receiving a gift directly from God, a temple so magnificent that even the priests couldn't stand in it because of God's glory. A queen traveling 1,000 miles and saying, "Not even half was told me." That was Israel at its best, the light of God shining through a people and drawing the nations to itself. And then, one compromise at a time, it all fell apart. Solomon married foreign women, just one, then two, then 700. Each one brought her gods. Each temple he built on the hills outside Jerusalem was a crack in the foundation. He didn't wake up one morning and decide to worship Molech. He drifted there, slowly, over decades, one small concession at a time. That's the warning, and it's not just for ancient kings. The most dangerous spiritual failures aren't the dramatic ones. They're the slow, quiet compromises that seem harmless at the time. The places where you tell yourself, it's just this one thing. It's not that big of a deal. Solomon proved that you can have more wisdom than any person who ever lived, and still lose everything if you don't guard your heart. After Solomon, the fracture spread. Rehoboam's arrogance split the kingdom. Jeroboam's fear corrupted worship. Each generation inherited the sins of the previous one and added their own. By the time we get to Ahab and Jezebel, Israel is so far from God that the storm god Baal has replaced the God who actually controls storms. The prophet who serves the real God is hunted like a criminal, while 850 false prophets eat at the queen's table. But here's what 1 Kings is really about, underneath all the politics and wars and prophets. It's about choices. Every person in this book was given a choice. Solomon chose foreign wives over God's commands. Rehoboam chose arrogant friends over wise elders. Jeroboam chose golden calves over trust in God's promise. Ahab chose Jezebel's gods over the God who sent fire from heaven. The widow of Zarephath chose to feed a stranger with her last meal. Obadiah chose to hide 100 prophets at the risk of his own life. And Elijah chose to stand alone on a mountain against 450 false prophets. He chose to trust God even when he felt like the last faithful person on earth. He chose to keep going even when he wanted to die. The book doesn't make these choices look easy. It doesn't pretend that doing the right thing always feels good, or that obedience comes with an immediate reward. Solomon had everything and lost it. Elijah won the greatest victory any prophet had ever seen, and then immediately wanted to quit. The widow fed Elijah her last bread and had to trust that the flour wouldn't run out. But through all of it, God remained faithful. He kept his promises, every single one, the good ones and the hard ones, the blessings and the consequences. When Solomon asked for wisdom, God gave him more than he asked for. When Jeroboam set up golden calves, God sent a prophet to declare the future king who would tear them down, by name, 300 years before he was born. When Jezebel hunted God's prophets, God made sure 100 of them were hidden in caves with food and water. When Elijah was so depressed he wanted to die, God didn't send a sermon. He sent bread, water, and a gentle whisper. When Ahab, the worst king in Israel's history, humbled himself even slightly, God noticed and showed mercy. The jar of flour didn't run out. The fire fell when it was called. The rain came after 3 years of drought, and 7,000 knees had not bowed to Baal. 1 Kings teaches us that God is always working, even when it doesn't look like it. Even when the wicked seem to prosper and the faithful seem to suffer, even when the kingdom splits and the temple treasures are hauled off to Egypt, even when a godly man sits under a bush and asks to die, God is at work, in the fire, in the earthquake, in the wind, but most powerfully in the still small voice that comes after everything else has passed. That's the book of 1 Kings. A story of human failure and divine faithfulness, of kingdoms built and kingdoms shattered, of the wisest man on earth losing everything, and a prophet with nothing gaining the presence of God in a whisper. And this is only the first half of the story, because in 2 Kings, the consequences of everything we just saw come crashing down. Elijah's departure is one of the most spectacular exits in the Bible. Elisha performs twice the miracles his master did. The northern kingdom finally falls to Assyria, and the southern kingdom faces its own reckoning. It gets even more intense. That video is on screen right now. Subscribe so you don't miss it.